All right, Tammy. So today we're meeting to talk about creating our individual professional development plan. Some of it can be based off of that observation, and then some of it will be based off of how you feel the school year has been going. So I have just kind of some notes, and I'll ask some questions to guide us through the process, and then by the end we'll have created a SMART goal to work towards, and then we will have an action plan of how we can work together to obtain that goal.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so last week, well, gosh, it wasn't last week, was it? It was on the 11th we did the observation,
Before spring
and
break.
then on the 16th of April we did our post-observation conference. So based off of that, from what you remember, what are some of those strength areas that we had talked about from the observation?
I think my relationships with my kids was one of my big strengths, and the having the materials, the work systems out for the kids,
Yes.
and the follow through.
Yes, yes, I would absolutely agree. So had here noted you have a very supportive culture that you utilize in your classroom. So not only from you, but also from your paraprofessionals. You work on restoring relationships when there are behavior concerns. And then I also wrote in your use of your visual supports, and I think just your prep of the baskets that you had prepped for your small group. You had the visuals to support the transition, so your kids were able to know exactly what was expected from them. Based off that observation, what would you say are some areas of growth, or that you feel like you could improve upon? Okay, sorry we got cut off. So some growth areas, or things that you feel like maybe you would do differently in the lesson based off of that observation that we did.
Well, I think one of my growth areas this year has been using more of the visuals and creating more of those, and I would like to continue that as I go forward, making them for all my different lessons. That lesson, I think I could have had, like I said before, some hands-on things. We were talking about bugs. I could have put some bugs on so they had something to engage with while I was reading and doing
Yes,
things. So
yes.
those are some areas I think I could have some growth.
Yep, and absolutely agree with you, because when I watched your table, everybody at your table was very actively engaged. And then when that one student became disengaged, having those at the table to support him before he became disengaged, or kind of as a prevention, to support engagement before he was desired to leave.
And
Those would be
I've even
good
thought
ideas.
with that book we could even add one or two little musical instruments to add some more depth
Yes,
to it. Would have been
yes, I
fun
think
too.
that would have been great. Very active learning.
Yep.
Yep. So something that I had noted is that, like you said, you wanted to continue to work on making those visual routines, especially for those intentional teaching cards, and that when we had left that post observation conference, you had talked about wanting to make them based off of the green color band, so that you could scaffold up for the students that would be higher, and scaffold down for students that would be lower, or needing like a
Wireless
lower
support.
skill. So when you think about this entire school year as a whole, what are some things that you have found that have worked well for you?
Being prepped ahead of time has been a big help. Again, I'm going to go back to using the work systems and the visuals so the kids know and are able to answer the 4 questions. What am I doing? How much do I have to do? When am I done? And where do I go next? That has been a huge benefit that I would like to continue to strive for. And that's all for now.
I would think too, your relationships. Like, you have had some students that have moved into your classroom that have had maybe not the most positive experiences so far in preschool, or maybe have had some hard experiences from home, like trauma or anything like that, and your willingness to accept them into your classroom and build a relationship quickly, and a strong relationship with them, I would say is another area that has worked out really well for you this school year.
That's because I love my littles.
You do, you do. Okay, Tammy. So what are some areas that you would identify as areas of growth for yourself? Think of everything that you stated for this year, and then, since we are almost to May, maybe think of this in terms of like what you would like to see for next school year, some areas of growth that you could work on at the beginning next school year and throughout the year.
Um, Does it have to be related to this lesson, or can
It doesn't have to be, it can be anything that you feel like
Okay.
this is your
My
individualized plan based off of, so like the professional development, you would find resources or anything like that that would help your learning so that you can, whatever the growth area you identified, you're going to take the responsibility and the ownership of
Okay.
the learning, and I'm just going to support you to make sure you have the resources you needed, that I'm doing my part to provide feedback if you need feedback. So it does not have to be related to this lesson. It can be anything that you personally want to work on.
I would personally like to get a little better at the IEP data and the writing of those and how to organize my materials and my even my past goals that I've written and stuff, so that when I can refer to those to reword new ones and with skills. Does that make sense? And using the higher prompting hierarchy the proper way, and because sometimes you use it with percentages and sometimes it's with numbers, and I would like to figure out how to do that in a more efficient way.
So what I hear you saying is you really want to work on having a data system or
Yes.
an organized data collection system, so that, and just so I want to make sure I'm understanding, so that you're collecting IEP data based off of what the IEP states and entering it based off of what the IEP states, but also reflective of the goal.
Yes.
And then when it comes to writing IEP goals, you want those goals to be individualized, based off of what
The child needs.
the child needs. And then when it comes to the prompting hierarchy, just kind of some more personal knowledge on how does the prompting hierarchy fit into different skills.
Yes, and
Okay.
how, and when do you use the percentage and when do you use the number?
Okay.
And within there, I would like to have some just basic wording for IEPs that, even though it's individualized, there's still like the one-to-one correspondence, the small group, how you want. There's certain things that are going to be similar in your SDI and stuff that I need to work on how to word that so it sounds professional and not like it's just blah.
So, and then, so this is something a little bit different. So you're talking, just to make sure I understand, you're talking about individualizing your SDI so that it's matches what the student goal is, but also matches the student need.
Yes, and the wording is professional, so when other people see it, they can understand. Oh,
can be-
I get what that means.
It can be generalized.
Yes.
So like as they go to kindergarten, they could pick up the IEP and know exactly what the direct instruction looks like.
Yes, without having to look into my brain to figure out what I was talking about.
Okay, yes, yeah, because that is very hard, because sometimes, I mean, even we've talked about, like, students that you've received from me, like, somebody else's progress monitoring
Yes.
sheet, somebody else's thought process, so absolutely. So you want user-friendly SDI.
Yes, that's what I want, so that it makes sense to somebody else.
I think that is a great area. So based off of your areas of growth, what are some resources that you could utilize?
Maybe you?
Your coach?
I can use my coach. I hear there might be some SDI training next year. Maybe I can go to that. Which I think would probably be a huge benefit in the wording and the figuring out so that it's more friendly.
Yes, and you're absolutely correct. There will be training provided by the Department of Education that will be specifically related to SDI, and it would touch on a lot of these areas that you had kind of identified that you wanted some more in. Are there any other resources that you feel like you could utilize?
I think co-teachers are a good resource too.
I agree.
Talking with them and teaming up and asking, hey, how have you done this? And
Great. So what would in your classroom, so what would it look like if you had SDI that was individualized and user-friendly, if you had a data collection system that was organized, if you had goals that were appropriate for the student and were functional? What would that look like in your classroom?
I hope it would look like when someone walked in my room, they could see, oh, everybody's doing what needs to be done, and you can just look at, oh my, that pair is working with this child on that, and the teacher's doing this group, and you can just walk in and see that those things are being met. And there may be a system of, I'm not sure how I want to say that, like a system where the materials are right here, and you can open this drawer and say, these materials go with this goal, these materials
Sure.
go with this goal, and
Sure.
it just is ready to go.
So it would look organized, all of the adults would be engaged with the students and the students would be receiving the supports that they need.
Yes.
Great. So how does your growth area fit into some of the preschool program goals, such as like literacy? Our goal was to increase our IGDs by 40%, and then SDI was to increase our personal knowledge about specially designed instruction and being able to create IEPs and implement IEPs that are individualized based off of student need. So based off of your growth areas, how would you say that fits with those goals?
I would say the whole SDI training would fit perfectly into the one part.
I agree.
And as far as the literacy part, I think if my goals, I have children with goals that are connected to literacy, having it more organized would be a benefit in helping those scores rise.
I agree. And I think in terms of, especially because it's so, so it's so direct to the performance on the IGDs assessment, even being able to analyze those different categories like rhyming, alliteration, and if those are areas of concern where a goal may be warranted, that would support,
Yes.
like you said, the performance on that assessment.
And even like the what doesn't belong, if you know how to categorize things, kids struggle with that. So that would be a
Absolutely.
good area to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so based off of what you've shared so far, we're going to kind of narrow down our focus and just kind of pick one thing to work on, and we're going to work through the process of creating a SMART goal. So SMART stands for, you want it to be specific, we want it to be measurable, we want it to be attainable, and then in timely. So what area would you like to focus on most based off of an organized data collection system, IEP goals, the prompting hierarchy, and then user-friendly SDI?
Probably the user-friendly SDI.
Okay?
Because I think that with the training, that's going to be the easiest and fastest. And I think the other things may fall into place after you have that training.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Because, like, your prompting hierarchy kind of falls in your progress monitoring. So if you already know how you're going to provide the instruction, that progress monitoring piece will kind of fit right in there. If you know what your instruction is going to look like, it will help you to write your IEP goal.
It'll help organize the stuff.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So how will you know when you have met your goal of creating user-friendly SDI? Like, what would it look like in your classroom?
I think one of the
what
things,
evidence would you see?
I think one of the biggest evidences would be is like my coach could look at my SDI and say, I know exactly what that means. Or
Thank you, no problem.
or my parents could pick up the IEP and say exactly what needs to be done without me trying, because I'm always feeling like I'm trying to re-explain it because I haven't explained it well enough.
It's kind of like the stranger test. It
Yes.
would pass anybody. If somebody didn't know Sally, they
Yes.
could pick up Sally's SDI or the specially designed instruction and know exactly how and what that instruction should look like. And
Exactly.
like times of the day it'll occur. Okay. When would you have like to have achieved your goal by?
The end of next year?
I think.
Can I have 36 weeks like our kids get?
Yeah,
Oh, humor here.
I love it. I'm gonna write that just for you.
36 weeks.
Okay, so what steps do you feel like will be needed to obtain your goal?
The training.
The
and
SDI training?
The SDI training. And possibly a way of having a coaching session like once every 2 weeks or something that we have, because I think I'm really guilty of saying, yeah, we're going to have a coaching session and then something else comes up, and if we just put it in our book and we have to do it and we'll make ourselves accountable.
And during those coaching sessions, tell me some things that you would like to work through with your coach that would help support you to write user-friendly SDI.
A way to organize, even on my computer, the wording things and like all my data's in one spot and stuff like that.
Okay, so now we're actually going to write our SMART goal. So similar to how we write our IEP goals, so you had already identified by the end of next school year, that's kind of our time, is when you'd like to achieve the goal.
Yep.
So by May of 2020, gosh, that seems so far away. So by May of 2020,
I would like my SDI boxes to be user-friendly for the stranger test.
will be user friendly. So as those as unfamiliar adults read the IEP, they understand how to
Implement the instruction.
So, as I'm processing writing your goal, do you feel like as you understand how to implement the direct instruction, your paras know how to implement direct instruction, do you feel like that would impact student progress on IEP goals at all?
Yeah, I would, yeah, because I mean, they would just, everything would be more uniform and more consistent.
So we have so far by May 2020, the SDI boxes will be user friendly. So as unfamiliar adults read the IEP, they understand how to implement the instruction, and we'd also see an increase in students meeting their goals.
Yeah.
Do you have like a certain, because that will be a really good way to measure your professional learning towards this. That it's like a more of a concrete.
So it would be like my students would increase their IEP goals by 30%,
Yeah, and meeting
meeting their IEP.
your number of students meeting IEP goals would increase by 30%. Okay.
That might be a little low, but we always
No,
start
I
low and
think
go
that's
high.
great because when I think of as like where you are right now, if you don't have, not saying that you don't, but if teachers don't have appropriate functional IEP goals where the SDI makes sense, or the teacher or the students have opportunities to practice it all day long, your percentage of students meeting goals right now may not be very high.
Exactly.
So maybe that's something that when we make our plan going forward in our professional development, that we can at first identify what's our baseline, like where are we at, how many students are actually meeting IEP goals, and then what are some more steps that we need to reach that goal. Okay, so kind of I already identified that we'll work through that baseline, or that you'll work through that baseline of determining right now how many students and of goals that you have, how many are meeting.
Okay.
So determine percentage of meeting goals.
So anybody that's not got a red line across the top is meeting their goal. We'll count that. Is that a way to use our
So
judgment?
I would say anybody that doesn't have, yes, like so similar. So that red line can be for the 4 data points above or below.
Yes.
So I would say if you have 4 data points above, I would count that as meeting.
Okay.
But if you have 4 data points that are below, I would count that as not meeting.
Exactly. Okay. So that'll be our measurement tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and then we had also talked about creating or participating in the SDI instruction, so that won't realistically be able to happen until the fall. But I want to say they just came out with the schedule, so the first training will happen in September. So you'd start your training in writing SDI beginning in September. Do you have a timeline of when you'd like to have that baseline determined by?
Let's say by the end of the school year, so we
Okay.
can start the next school year with that information.
That sounds good. So May of 2019. So training in September. Is there anything else that you feel like you could do that would benefit you in writing? You had mentioned like coaching meetings.
You could do something similar to that. I'm just not exactly sure how to word it.
So you had mentioned like coaching meetings once every 2 weeks. When would you like those to start? Would you like those to be once every 2 weeks for the entire school year? Would you like that to be faded so that you are working on that more independently?
I think I like to start with once every 2 weeks at the beginning of the school year and then fade after Christmas to once a month.
Okay.
If I'm on the right track.
Absolutely. Okay, so then when I think about myself as your administrator, some things that I can do is I can do come into your classroom probably once every quarter or so, and then look for those things that you had kind of mentioned what it would look like. The paras are actively engaged with students. It appears that all of the students are being supported in the classroom. You have a system for not necessarily data collection, but you have a system of how you're providing instruction. And then some other things that I can look for when I'm in here as well is maybe just looking over some of that paperwork to see if that STI passes that stranger test.
Okay.
So let's see, I can do once a quarter, so maybe by like October 1st, I can do one. And then maybe check in one more time before we go to break, so December 1st. And then after break, gonna let you get settled, so maybe February 1st.
Sounds good.
And then at the end of the year, because I know we have like spring break and home visits is May 1st. Is that kind of,
Yeah, we'll go with
that gets into transition, so I know that can kind of get hairy. Do you feel like that would be overwhelming?
We can plan it, and if it doesn't work, we can always, that's a year away, we can see where we're at.
Sounds good. Okay, so my plan will just be to kind of come in and do some walkthrough, some informal observations, provide you with feedback based off of what those IEPs state. And then we'll just kind of keep monitoring your progress toward that goal and see if we can get to that 30%.
Okay,
Thanks, Tammy.
thank you.